This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 10:07 at WPSL 1590. The talk of the Treasure Coast, and you're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast.
And happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
Yes,
this
absolutely.
Weekend. Yeah.
Every one of them. Hope it's a great day for them, a great weekend. And, yeah.
And if your mother's up in the penthouse like mine is, say a little prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is where mine is as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she's been there for a while.
Yeah. Ours too. Yep.
So.
Ours too.
Yep.
Some reason that happens in life.
Most often. Actually, my heart also goes out to those mothers whose children are mothers of angels.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunately large club.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of our old ESPN folks lost a daughter who I think has been battling cancer since she was a teenager and finally passed at about 23. It's like, oh, gosh.
The teenage cancers are among the worst.
Yeah. It's and hats off to Coach Nick Vitale over across the state in Bradenton. He had a big Jimmy V cancer fundraiser. It raised $12.8 million for cancer research.
Wow.
So congratulations.
Okay.
And
so
God knows we need it.
Absolutely. We really, really do. So there's the Moffitt Cancer Center across the state, and they do a ton of research. And actually, one of the groups that I belong to raises money for them.
They are awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, you know, when you hear Moffitt, you know, you kind of, you know, you go with some of the elite, you know, the big clinics in New York City, Mayo Clinic, you know, it's like they're up there in that strata.
They definitely are. They work really, really hard to save their patients and do a ton of research. We're learning more and more about cancer. We unfortunately do things in our lives that help cancer. It's a two-edged thing. We live longer, so we tend to have more chronic diseases. And cancer for many is a chronic disease. It's something they live with for a long time, or live after and live with fear of reoccurrence.
And a lot of it is, you know, can be traced back to like prepackaged foods and stuff like that.
And there's there's also the wonderful chemicals in our kitchens and under the sinks.
Oh, yeah.
And chlorine and all those other things that just are horrible to the body. And it's interesting because you don't hear a whole lot about how toxic the things we clean our homes are.
No.
They cause so many problems. I know I sent, and I forgot to bring the bottle. Did you like the difference in those blueberries I showed?
Our COVID bottles. Oh, yeah. That was shocking. I mean, they look brand new.
Yeah. One of the things that is really important, especially for pregnant women, is to wash their fruits and veggies and get all of the different things that they're dusted and sprayed with in the fields off of them, because they're not good for us. That's not how it naturally grows. And yes, farmers have been battling insects since there have been farmers.
And even some of the organic stuff needs to be washed. I mean,
organic doesn't mean no pesticide. That's one of the
you think it does, though.
You know, you want to think that it does. You want to think that they only use organic methods to care for the plants, but that's not what it means. It means that they use organic fertilizers. It's really what it means. And they will still use pesticides. They have to. They have to use pesticides in order to have a large enough crop. If anyone's ever seen a tomato bug eat their tomatoes, they understand that you can't let it, a farmer can't afford to let a field go like that.
Yeah.
If they don't do something, it's an interesting piece. I'm going to flip to someplace you might not expect with that, but Biosphere 2.
Mm-hmm.
When Biosphere 2 did their 2-year experiment in between the space between Tucson, closer to Tucson, but between Tucson and Phoenix, you can look it up on the internet if you don't know what I'm speaking about. We live on Biosphere 1, which is the Earth, and the folks at Biosphere 2 created a self-contained environment, a farming area, a living area, and then a small planet, if you will.
Was this by Marana up on the way
It's
up
up.
to Phoenix?
If you go up to the northwest and cut toward Phoenix, one of those roads leads off to Biosphere.
Okay, we've got to see that.
I think it's the University of Arizona that owns it now. It's changed hands a few times, so I'm leery of saying anything for sure without checking the website to see who currently owns it. But they do offer tours through the facility. And as I said, for 2 years, that was, I don't know, the 60s, 70s? Must have been 70s.
It had to be 70s after we left. We left Tucson in 74. So
probably right after that.
Yeah, it had to be right after.
And I'm saying that because I'm trying to think of the technology. It's before having computers to do. Today, they wouldn't have suffered the way that they suffered back then. And hopefully the people who built it could have learned more. They made a serious mistake about concrete. They didn't know how long concrete takes to cure. And so they built the facility and moved in, and the concrete had not yet fully cured. And so it kept absorbing oxygen out of the system. And they thought they'd made a mistake in their calculations and secretly dumped a little bit of oxygen in it. And if they'd known what it was, they could have allowed for it and dumped oxygen in for the concrete that was still curing. People don't realize it. It turns white and it's strong, but it ain't done curing yet. It just ain't.
Well, if you go to San Francisco, there's this brand new office tower. It's turning into the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Ooh.
It's as you said. They said the foundation had not cured properly.
Yeah.
And so the thing is leaning now.
And that's one of the reasons why it takes so long to build some roadways. They have to give the concrete time to do its thing. So it's not just a matter, sometimes they can pre-form it off-site and truck it in and assemble it, and then it's had additional time to cure. But if they pour it on-site and put it up, then it's going to be a couple of years until it's open. It's a function of concrete. Concrete is an interesting mixture.
Yeah, it really is. And,
Thank you, Romans.
Yeah, really. It goes all the way back.
All the way back.
Well, yeah, aqueducts and stuff like that. Yeah. But, you think about your old field flying and runways.
Airplanes.
Runways. And you think, okay, this runway was built almost a year ago, and there's still no traffic on it.
That's why.
Exactly. That's it.
That's why. It has to cure. It has to cure. And as I said, it part of curing is it oxidizes. And that means it takes free oxygen and bonds it into its molecules. And it's interesting to know that a gas is part of what makes concrete strong. Who'd have thunk it?
That's amazing.
Yeah. But it needs those bonds in the oxygen molecules to form its final form. So yeah, that was what Biosphere 2 didn't get. But where I was going to go with that is they did a ton of farming. They raised their food, and they accidentally didn't wash the veggies enough before bringing them in to this wonderful environmental area.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they really did. They had a big problem with keeping the insect population down because they couldn't use insecticide because their water was 100% recycled, and they didn't have a good filter to remove the poison if they had put it in. Okay, so there's a great book out there written by one of the people who went through the 2 years, called 2 Years and 20 Minutes. And the reason for the 20 minutes is because the speaker who was there to bring them out talked 20 minutes over her allotted time. And so the people inside were like ready to kill her because they were waiting for the door to open. And
just get us out of here.
Yeah, even the 20 minutes hurt when they wanted to get out, and I can understand that because they were isolated. They couldn't be with their families. They couldn't, they couldn't go out and see a show. They couldn't do a lot of the things that people consider part of everyday life. Yeah, no McDonald's, no Ruby Tuesday, no.
They went 2 years without a McDonald's?
Yeah. They had to make their own. Right, so, they joked about it. They said, well, what does it take to make a pizza? Well, first you got to grow the wheat. Then you have to grind it. Then you have to milk the cow or the goat and make your cheese, and et cetera, et cetera. So, but yeah, because of the insect problem, they actually would wash the veggies down most mornings with soapy water and sit there and squish the bugs to try to get rid of them. Yeah, that was one of the extra duties that they had to fill their day with. Everybody had an hour of squishing bugs to try to keep enough of the food in the garden for the humans.
Wow.
They did have a number of different animals in there, and they discovered that keeping animal protein alive is actually not a very resource-friendly way to get your protein. Yeah. So animals slowly went extinct in the biosphere. They really did need to come out at 2 years. I'm not sure how much longer they could have survived in there. So while, yes, it did prove that it could be self-sufficient, there were enough problems in what they did that they were running out of time. It was just going to take them a good while to get there.
I thought of you when NCIS Hawaii had this thing. They were solving this murder that was occurring on Mars. And, that on the Big Island, they had this Mars experiment. And I'd heard about that. I mean, I guess it was a true story, actually. Yeah. And a couple folks just went a little crazy in there.
Well, and the folks in the Biosphere 2 experiment, basically, what's kind of interesting was because it was a small group, it was, I think, 8 people living in this tiny space for 2 years, they actually formed 2 groups that even when she wrote the book, the 2 groups were not talking.
Ooh.
That's how deep the animosity got. And one of the recommendations out of that was that the group needed to talk to therapists to process the stuff, and they needed somebody who was on neither side of the rift, that be a disinterested third party kind of
arbitrator.
An arbitrator, right?
Wow.
To work through things. One of the people in there was a doctor, and assorted different folks. The one who wrote the book, actually, I think her home is in Marana, or was in Marana. I'm not sure which, but it was being built while she was inside there. So it's an interesting story. It's an interesting premise. They had a savanna, they had a rainforest, they had a desert, they have an ocean. They had a coral reef. I don't know if it's still existing. It's not showing up on the register of coral reefs anymore. And that's scary because...
So how big was this dome?
It's huge. It's absolutely
huge. It had
huge.
to be.
Yeah.
It had to be.
The tour takes a couple hours, I think, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
We dedicated the day to it, and I know we walked all over. We not only walked through the biosphere itself and through the living area and the labs and all of that they had, and they look 50-ish in some ways. It was built ahead of its time, so the technology is not what it would be today, but it was completely sealed. So that, and people would come by, and there were windows where the people inside would wave to them, and they'd write things and talk by that way.
Wow.
So today they would set it up very differently, I'm sure. But if you walk on the outside of it, There are experiments, a ton of environmental experimentation. It's where we hear they came out with some of the roof garden for cooling. That's very popular now. That came out of some of the experiments that the University of Akron was running at that facility. So it's now an experimental development environmental location as well. They also have dorms, small, tiny dorms for retreats and conferences that can be rented. So they're set up to do that kind of thing as well.
You see that in like New York and Philly and Chicago. Roof gardens are just huge now.
Yeah, they're becoming ever bigger for a couple of reasons. Especially in cities, they help counter the carbon monoxide and some of the other toxins that are in the air. The plants clean that. We don't realize as we sit here, and Port St. Lucie right now is just obliterating the natural trees and the gardens. And aside from what that's doing to our wildlife, I don't even really want to think about that. It's horrific. But we're also taking the plants out, and with that, our pollution and smog and all of that's going to go up.
I was shocked to see the development on East Becker on the way to the river. It was like
all the way. Oh yes, you go out to the yacht club.
It looks like the moon out here.
Yeah.
The vegetation is gone.
It's gone.
Gone.
Yeah.
It's
and evermore the path between Becker and Tradition, what we call the back road.
Yep.
Which forgive me, folks, I can never remember Tradition Parkway or Village Parkway. The one goes east-west, the other one goes north-south, but they're the two main drags toward Tradition. And the amount of clearing going on along there is just devastating, too.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize that those had been largely abandoned grapefruit fields, grapefruit orchards with cows here and there. You still see a few cows in the area, but not many. And we're changing the environment. One of my colleagues at Kaiser talks about the urban biology.
Ooh.
Yeah, the urban ecosystem, and that we're creating it by what we do. So we do have different plants and different animals that live well in urban settings. And we're probably going to see a lot more damage from things like wild pigs and deer and things like that, because they're not moving into the cities. The cities are moving
into their homes.
And so
sure.
They're going to adapt. And yeah. So summer has started at IRSC and at Kaiser.
Yeah.
They both started this past week.
So how are your classes? Are you
They're
excited?
I am excited. I have 2 classes at both IRSC and at Kaiser. So I've got a full summer schedule. Keeps me busy. I'm teaching Intro to Philosophy and Intro to Humanity at IRSC, my usual topics these days. And this term I'm teaching Forensic Psychology and Intro to Counseling.
Forensic Psychology?
Mm-hmm. Those are psychologists who help law enforcement.
Oh, okay.
On TV, they do profiling and stuff like that, but real psychologists in the field don't do that.
Huh, okay.
And, yeah.
Forensic Psychology. Never heard that before.
There are folks who try to work with law enforcement and just modify and help departments do things psychologically as sound as they can. And they might explain and help them in a variety of different ways, using the tools of psychology to help understand what's going on.
How many students do you have at IRSC?
There's about 40 in each class.
Wow.
So
large classes.
Yeah, they're fully packed. I tend to have fully packed classes.
Okay.
So, yeah. I don't get when I started, I used to have the 25 to 30. Now they're almost always. Every once in a while, I actually have to let a student in. And it's okay.
There you go.
I love teaching, so it works.
Yeah, yeah. And Kaiser, much smaller, I'm
Much,
sure.
much smaller. Yeah, Kaiser is in the single-digit numbers, except for some of the nursing classes. And that's one of the strengths of Kaiser.
Individualized.
Is much more individualized, much more. I really do know the students by name and by face, and I know them long after they're in my class, and I see them for much of their years in getting their degrees. So they're different. They're just totally different environments, and I love the change. Summer's a little bit weird at IRSC because it's only 6 weeks. So what basically it's done is taken a semester and folded it in on itself. At Kaiser, on the Port St. Lucie campus, the students, excuse me, with the exception of some of the nursing students, take generally a 4-week term, a 4-week class. So if they're going the summer semester, they will take 4 classes in the ABCD term.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
So now, how long are the classes at Kaiser? Are they an hour in length?
Much, much longer. A typical class will go 4 hours 3 times a day,
Oh.
3 times a week. So you're getting...
Sure. Okay, so you're still getting.
Yeah, you're getting the semester
Gotcha.
in a week.
Mm-hmm.
Basically what they've done is every day of class is like a week.
Wow. Oh, man.
And no, they don't have to sit in their chairs for 4 solid hours. They do get breaks.
There you go.
They need the breaks, and even more than they do, I
do.
need the breaks. Yeah.
Sure.
And we do activities, and you can't sit and lecture at a group of students, big or small, for 4 hours and hold their attention. It's a human impossibility.
By the way, hats off to my alma mater in L.A. Loyola Marymount. Pardon me, ladies. But they have a wonderful ad in today's New York Times.
Okay.
We're an anti-racist university. We are Catholic. We are Muslim. We are Jewish.
Ooh, I'd like to see that ad.
And Carol showed it to me this morning. I'm going, wow, this is amazing. And then and then they have specialized legal at their law school in downtown LA. But wow, socially responsible. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
So
And the reality is we're all human beings. I don't care what faith tradition you belong to, believe in, adhere to here. They all talk about creation. They all have a creation story. And it usually involves a creator God. And it's one of my pet peeves when somebody says, well, they're God. And I'm like, is that any different from your God? Didn't your God, single God, create this universe?
Yes.
Well, unless we're going to believe in multiple gods creating the universe, we got a problem. So it's the same God. The relationship might be slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
How we view, Judaism says that we partner with God, which is an interesting concept. We have responsibilities to and with God to care for the planet and each other. That's the Jewish approach.
Well, you have a direct message to God.
It's a local call.
Yeah.
Is the standard
Well,
joke.
unlike.
Right. There's nobody in between. There's nothing. There's no problem in the relationship. Yes, God gets angry. Yes, we get angry. Humans get angry at God. Usually, that really means mad at ourselves, because we're interconnected. Judaism says we all have the divine within us, the spark that is connected and part of the source. And that's one of the names of God, is the source of all life. And so that's where I typically start when people ask me my personal definition of God, and it's the force that creates life. It causes us to breathe. And we'll go from there. The rest is a function of definition and experience. How have you experienced God? What does God feel like, taste like, smell like to you? that's a personal experience, but it doesn't change the reality of what God is. So you and I each look at a cherry pie. We might look at it, see different things. We might touch it and feel different things. We might smell it, taste it, listen to the sound of it being cut or whatever. But it doesn't change the cherry pie. It's our connection to the pie. And that's how it works with God. God is God. If God is the creator and the source of life, then if we're alive, then clearly something caused that. Even if it was an accident, something caused it. And the question of whether or not God is intercessory or interacts or participatory in our daily lives is a function of how we experience that force. Do we experience it as sentient? Do we experience it as caring, as loving, as interacting? And my personal answer would be yes, but it's not everybody's answer. And it doesn't have to be. It doesn't change God. God's bigger than our individual disputes. So it's time to recognize one of the things that I tell my classes. Just because I'm right doesn't make you wrong, and just because you're right doesn't make me wrong. We like to say that the sun rises in the morning. The sun doesn't do any such thing. The sun sits there and burns its little heart out.
We're moving.
We're moving. We're twirling. It's a perception. It's not the most likely physical model, because moving through the sky would just not make sense. That would be a little roadshow kind of scenario. And I don't think the universe is a sideshow. So, yeah, I think we rotate, and it makes the sun appear to rise. It's that our relative position changes.
There was this video. I can't remember whether we were watching NBC or Fox News, but with that new telescope, and there was the sun. We're talking millions of miles out, that was literally devouring
its planets.
One of the orbiting planets.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh no. Could this happen here?
Yeah. Someday it will, when the sun supernovas.
So the astronomer was saying, I'm going, wow.
Yeah, I don't think you and I have to worry about that.
No.
It's sobering. One of my colleagues it's the James Webb Telescope. Thank you, Al.
Yeah, that's it.
My listeners are on the ball today.
They are.
They also were talking about the land bridges that Europe puts in over highways for the wildlife to cross over. So I'll mention that because that had flashed earlier. But the sun will supernova. And I started to mention that one of my colleagues at Kaiser came in and commented, "Do you know that we've got students that were born in 2005 in our classes?"
Yes.
And yeah, if they're 18 and starting college,
yes,
they were born in 2005, well after 9/11. They don't know a pre-9/11.
They've only read about it.
They don't know life without cell phones. They don't know life without e-books. They don't know life without microwaves.
How did people live before cell phones? Good grief.
They don't know life before plug and play in the cars, unless they ride in mine, which comes from their vintage. I think it's a 2004. So my car is older than my students. That's a sobering thought. How to feel young, or as I like to tell my students, I grew up with the dinosaurs in my backyard. Slight exaggeration, but to them I'm sure it doesn't feel like much.
Go out to my car and listen to cassette tapes. Oh.
There are those floating around. It's notable. My husband's radio died a year or two ago, and so he took out the old radio and put in a new one. And where he had been making CDs to put into it. He now had a thumb drive plugged into the.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I chuckle when I see that because I see his little thumb drive plugged into his radio.
Why not?
But I, of course, sit and listen to WPSL. Digital 1590.
Oh,
How's that for getting a plug-in?
I think, yeah, when you were on the air one day, I went out there and made it a mandatory preset on there.
Okay.
That's the only thing you get on your radio.
There you go.
Actually, when KABC, it was masterful. They did this with the Dodgers. They gave away, and I have no idea who made these radios, that would only get 790. It wouldn't get any other frequency, just got 790, of course, Dodgers. And so I was thinking, oh, my. Yeah.
One way to control the world. And, in fact, that is, right? One of the ways that you control the world is controlling what news station and what everything you get. People learn much more than we might like from TV and radio. It's the inputs that we have, and it affects dramatically the development of people, which is why, as I teach in my psychology and in my philosophy classes, we learn a lot from Disney movies, and the question becomes, what responsibilities do companies like Pixar and Disney and Universal and all of those have because of the power that they yield?
Well, question I have is, do they even care?
If the public cares, they will care.
Okay.
Because if the public cares, it will, in the long run, affect the bottom line. And I think that corporations understand that. The challenge with corporations is that very often they're short-term focused and not long-term focused.
Short-term profit.
Short-term profit, because that's going to turn what they've invested, and their plan is to get out before it all caves in as a house of cards. And we've seen the results of that, things like Enron and other companies that have come and gone and disappeared from the landscape.
And this week, Paramount cutting 25% of its employees, including MTV going away after 37 years.
It's a function of what people do and watch and public opinion. That really is a public opinion kind of thing. It's kind of, if you will, a George Orwellian 1984. He just missed the year by something. We're going in that direction.
Well, and what's really scary to me, and this may sound weird coming from a television person, the death of newspapers. I just think that that's tragic.
I agree, and at the same time, part of that has to do with the inability for many of the newspaper companies to move into the new media effectively. There wasn't an easy, good way to regulate the internet as it was coming on into our lives. And I think that there's an interesting piece, because what's free gets watched, what's free gets listened to. So how do you monetize? How do you decide which articles are subscription only? How do you build value? And I think that as much as I don't like the ads that crop in everywhere, I think that ads are part of that. You either do a subscription if you don't want ads, or you put up with advertising. Ads, which is as perfect place as any to say, folks, if you like what you hear on Ask a Rabbi, you too could help keep this show on the air by being a sponsor. We are looking for sponsors. If you'd like to sponsor one or more, please call that same number that you called to ask a question, which is 772-340-1590. So you can either call and ask a question, or you can call and ask for either Greg or Carol, and they will help you sponsor one or more episodes of Ask a Rabbi.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about you.
And we are advertiser-based.
They are advertiser-based.
We wouldn't exist.
Right. And
We don't do the begathons like QCS does. It's the college.
However, I'm begging.
Well, we may try and begathon a little.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We ask for sponsors and advertisers.
Yeah.
And I will talk about whatever you can put input into the topics that I discuss. I will certainly be glad to anything along those lines.
Mm-hmm. You bet.
So
Feel free, call us.
absolutely, please do. So yeah, new classes starting summer.
So now, what's your Kaiser class then?
My Kaiser class, one is forensic psychology, and the other one is counseling theories.
Okay, what is your second class at IRSC then?
I've got intro to philosophy and intro to humanities.
Oh, okay. They are different.
They are slightly different. Intro to philosophy spends more time dealing with the classic philosophers, so Socrates, Kant, all of those. They'll come into the intro to humanities. Intro to humanities is applied psychology, or applied philosophy rather, not psychology. It's how do philosophers work in this system or that system, and very often it's ethics. Ethics is a big part of applied philosophy. How ought we to live? The question that Socrates asked. How ought we to live? What should we do? Should we care about our neighbors? Does it matter if our neighbor suffers? And I personally think that until we realize that, yes, it does matter, it matters on many different levels. To think that we are isolated islands and that the rest of the world doesn't matter is to not look out at the world.
But do we get it?
I don't think enough of us do. If we did, I think we'd be kinder to each other and to ourselves. There isn't a religion around that doesn't teach some version of the Golden Rule. For Christianity, it's do unto others as you would have them do. In Judaism, it's a little bit different. It's don't do unto others what you would not want them to do to you. I think a little broader. That also is what Confucius said, and it's what many religious leaders in many traditions, it's one version or the other. But almost everybody teaches that in some way. Because, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting that you mentioned Confucius, and I would imagine you go back
to the Silk Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
We are foolish if we think that humans ever didn't communicate and connect, unless people didn't want to, unless people were hiding. So I look at hiding, and the Seminoles was becoming one of my popular topics because I think it's horrible how invisible Florida has treated them. They have lessened their value as human beings by connecting. You want to tell me what they teach, Al? And that they hid because they had to survive, because Andrew Jackson and his successors were trying to capture all of the indigenous people and either kill them or move them out to Oklahoma and points west. At that, originally in Oklahoma was called Indian Territory.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of the Seminoles from Alabama and Georgia and northern Florida were captured, and thousands were taken out there, along with Choctaw, Chickasaw, and some other nations. The Trail of Tears. Huge, the number of Indians that died marching to Oklahoma. The Seminoles here actually looked at Oklahoma when the U.S. government said, let us move you out there, and that way we can have peace, i.e. we'll take your land and make you restart.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah. And the Seminoles actually sent a delegation out to Oklahoma, looked at it, came back and said, "Nuh-uh, we're not going." And that was Osceola. He and Abiaka were responsible for helping to lead the Seminoles into the Everglades. They captured Osceola pretending to create a truce. They put white flags out and said, let's have a peace talk. and Osceola and Chicusa, I'm mispronouncing the second name, came in to do the peace talks, and they grabbed them and took them to prison in South Carolina. Another example of white man lies. And it's rife. Jackson had a personal vendetta against indigenous people. He just did. He disobeyed orders to start the war with Spain in Florida. He aggressed far beyond what he was asked to do. And then he became president, so that really... And he was there for the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which was the second Seminole War. The Seminoles call it the Long War because it started in the early 1800s and went through the mid-1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, they disappeared into the Everglades. A small group of anywhere from 200 to 300 is the number that you hear. There were, I think, 10 or 12 clans at the time. A couple clans have gone extinct. There are now 8 in the Seminole, which means that there's 8 families in the Seminole. The Panther clan is about half the population. It is the largest, and it has actually separated into big and small. The small panther is the bobcat, and the large is called tiger. So Sally Mae Tiger Jumper. And that's what Seminoles very often do. They'll put their clan name somewhere, either a middle or last name.
Okay. Huh.
It's kind of interesting. So there's 8 families, if you will, of Seminole. And everybody's in one of those clans. The clans are run by the women. It's matriarchal. The matriarch gets to decide what is and isn't functional.
Well, isn't everything like that? Our marriages are run by women.
The question is whether or not that's recognized or just de facto.
Yeah, a lot of people it would.
In the Seminole Nation, the husband joins the wife's clan. Is still responsible for teaching the lessons from their clan and the skills from their clan to the children, but the children will grow up in the mother's clan. And Al is mentioning Navajos are also matriarchal. A lot of indigenous folks are matriarchal. That makes a lot of sense, actually. If you will, lion packs are matriarchal too. Mama's the hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Mama says what goes. The males just lay around and roar a lot.
That's just like today.
Mm-hmm. I was not going to go there, but leaving that open for
It
interpretation.
does sound a lot like me, actually.
Well, we have the saying that is told by many of a father to his son at a wedding, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Right?
Oh, my.
It is important. I think it's important to have partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
Again, maybe that's because I'm Jewish and coming out of a Jewish environment where it's about how you build partnerships, how you leverage. When do you hold the door for somebody? When do you carry a package that's in their arms? When does one wash and one dry? I realize that dishwashers have made that obsolete for the most part, but the same analogy. Who does what? Who cooks? Who cleans?
No, but the dishwashing is very important because the present White House is going to outlaw those.
Dishwashers?
Yeah.
Okay.
They use too much water. So,
They do. They use a ton of water.
yeah. So,
And just as our washing machines have learned to use less water, so will our dishwashers.
just invent the button that
Mhm.
says low water.
Yeah. And it will work.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I just want to know how my old home state, and you lived in California for a while,
I did.
is going to exist without diesel in gas stations and without diesel trucks delivering stuff. By 2030, I don't think that's going to happen.
Are they also outlawing diesel for distance hauling?
Yep.
That is going to be an interesting piece.
You can't go electric, folks. I don't know. I think they've gone mad out there.
It's I'm trying to break myself with the habit. It's a challenge, and I think about the requirement of so many cars being electric. And when that edict first came out, everybody looked at that and said, impossible, impossible, impossible. And we now have electric cars. We now have plug-in meters that you can reserve in parking lots. It works. You can make it work. When I lived in Minnesota, which was not long, my parents lived in Minnesota for a while. I visited them. I didn't really live there. And the cars that come out of Minnesota all had block heaters. And there, the parking meters, you paid your little meter fee and you plugged your car in so that the block heater kept the block warm. And it was a great incentive to make sure you put the little coin in the meter because you wanted to have that electric to keep your block warm. So you didn't forget your cars, because if you let it freeze over, there was going to be a whole big pain to try to get it to kick over. There are two kinds of block heaters. We had we had the one actually after we started with the electric, and then we had the one that was on board, which it started the engine. So you'd be sitting there quietly wherever, and all of a sudden the car would go vroom, and it would start itself up and run long enough to keep the engine warm, and then it'd turn off again. And they had a great safety so that you couldn't you couldn't use that to put the car in gear. It would stop immediately if you tried. If you even touched the car, it just turned off.
Wow. They had a great story on 60 Minutes. The brand new lithium fields by Salton Sea in Southern California. And this would be just south of Palm Springs. And you look at that, and you see this land just bubbling up, and it's the lithium. And they're talking about having enough lithium for 200 to 300, maybe 400,000 automobiles. And a constant. It doesn't stop there. So, yeah, that would be amazing. But it's going to take...
It takes that kind of
research.
Right. And if it doesn't work, laws can be changed. And if they need to be, they will be.
Mm-hmm.
There was once a law that said you had to have a bell and a light so much ahead of every horseless carriage.
Yeah.
And as horseless carriages became the domain of riding, those rules changed. And my listener here is mentioning that China controls much of the planet's lithium, which is true.
Which is very true. And that's what they were talking about in the story.
Some of the big undercurrent in world politics is who controls which rare minerals and where do we need it, and those kinds of questions. That's the piece that the media doesn't cover.
No, and they have no idea. And it's when you talk to a lot of the soldiers who were in Afghanistan, and you see the poppy fields.
Mm-hmm.
What is under the poppy fields? Rare earth.
Yeah.
And that's why we were in Afghanistan.
Right.
No one in government will tell you that.
No, of course not.
But that's what we wanted to get our hands on, was the rare earth under there. Yeah.
There's a ton of things along those lines that are going on in the world, and the story is underneath. And the question needs to be asked is, why are we not being told these things? Who benefits? Follow the money. I've said it before.
Yeah.
Comes down to who wants what and what's important. And it almost never is the cover story. It seems to be human nature to tell one story but mean another. And certainly that's true for big business. We've got a whole medical system that's based on treating symptoms but not curing disease. They're looking for things to keep people alive enough that they have to keep buying the medicine.
I know Dr. Scheib talking about the Chinese medicine. It is not the same as Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, they don't treat a disease. They create wellness as part of that.
Yeah, and that's very, very different. It's important to be well. And I think that a lot of people don't get it. It's something like when I see one of those little infomercials, click here and turn on your speaker and listen to this hour-long spiel so I can sell you $50 worth of sugar pills or something, some little device. And you know, if somebody's going to spend that much time telling you about it, it probably isn't real.
You think? Oh, brother.
Infomercials. Love those. The world is an interesting place. And so getting back to where we started it, what does a forensic psychologist do? Parses through some of that for law enforcement.
There you go.
And working through what people really mean, what they're really doing. Not that they're always right.
That sounds like that would be an incredible career, actually.
It is. And there are only a few places that offer a degree in forensic psychology itself, or a dual degree of law and psychology, which is really what is the best way to do it.
Yeah, I would think especially the police academy at IRSC would have that as...
They do teach some psychology courses, not many. They actually are the ones who teach the the abnormal psychology. And a couple of those, they're not under the psychology department, they're under the criminal justice, which is interesting. Forensic, of course, means having to do with the forum of the law. It's another Roman term. So when they talk about forensic evidence, it's evidence from the forum, or that could be presented to the forum.
Wow.
It's an interesting world we live in, getting ever more interesting, and yet the more things change, the more they stay the same. All those pithy statements. Life is true. Be kind to each other. Remember, there is a God spark in each and every one of us, and it matters. Have a great week, everyone.
Where do we find you?
We find us at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102, front building, next to the elevator. Please do join us 7:30 for Friday night services.
Have a good week.
You too.
Happy Mother's Day all.
Happy Mother's Day all. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation Eitz Chayim, and this has been another episode of Ask a Rabbi.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, and webcaster to the world.